Well, welcome. The door's open and you can walk right in. If you're welcome nowhere else, you're certainly welcome here. As our friend Rumi always says, why do you stay in your jail cell when the door's wide open? Welcome to Fishing Without Bait. Welcome to a world of full impact mindfulness where we challenge people to actually participate in their lives. We try to help people get out of the wishing and hoping mode and get into the action part of their lives. We talk about buying the ticket into their life, and we challenge people to connect with their authentic selves. We're not much on finding yourself. We're about creating yourself. What would you like to be? We're more interested in what you are rather than what you're not. We're interested in you inventorying your gifts, talents, and abilities and walking through life with your eyes wide open. And for the followers of this show, if you've been participating the last number of months, you've probably realized that, as we always, we take a different curve every now and then. We take a left at the North Star and we land in different types of places. And we've had an eclectic group of guests. However, they all share one common theme, and they're at the cutting edge of what they do. They're into alternative explanations, alternative, perhaps realities, if you'd like to say that. And today we're joined by my friend and compatriot, a colleague of mine, Dr. Matt Keener. Matt, could you give a little brief bio of yourself before we plunge forward?
Yeah, Jim, thanks for having me again. Always a pleasure to sit with you. So I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist and entrepreneur here in Pittsburgh, where I've lived for the past, I think we're going on 17 years now, and lifelong Pennsylvanian. And I'm interested in helping adolescents with their brain health / mental health, as we call it.
And on this program, Matt, we ask people to label and identify the boundaries of their comfort zones, as a lot of times they're self-created by depression, anxiety, drug addiction, alcohol, whatever. However, the places aren't comfortable. However, they're familiar. And we often tell people that the growth takes place outside of that comfort zone. We like to tell people that they're like a balloon with an infinite capacity for expansion. And we like to irritate people enough that they get enough against those boundaries and they want to get restless, irritable, and discontented enough to grow. And in that case, you often think outside the box, do you not?
Yeah, I've been accused of that. As a psychiatrist, you're already a bit outside the box of medicine. We're on pretty far on the left-hand spectrum of the entire span of medicine as a whole, and so we kind of start off on the periphery. But I've always had I guess it started when I was working at Thomas Jefferson Center for Integrative Medicine. Having a chance to really sit outside the box and see what it's like to help people on their health journey, pulling together disparate treatment elements into an overall care plan that started my journey, I guess.
I think the first time I met you was a number of years ago, and you were talking about some type of dealing with technology in order to not only help people in their mental health, but to help people participate in their lives. And sometimes that's the antithesis of what sometimes what we preach, is that we help people disconnect to connect and get it back into natural cycles. However, one of the purposes of us doing that is we find, Matt, people who overindulge, and rather than allowing technology to be a tool of theirs, they become a tool of technology.
Yeah, which is it's a really easy thing to happen. And, one thing I'd like to just point out to people, just to shake some perceptions or get people thinking, any human who's neurologically intact learns how to speak or talk. However, and this is across cultures, any culture in the world, but written communication is a tool that's passed down through culture. It's a technology, pen and paper, right? To write is a technology. And we tend to think of technology as these things like that are in our hands, holding these microphones and things that have wires or microchips or software attached to them. But there's a pretty broad scope of things in our world, the wheel as an example, that are technologies that we've created for use within our culture and remain in our broader culture. So the broader human story is one that does incorporate tools and technologies. And so I think the most human approach is to be mindful of the technology that we're using and use it mindfully.
Isn't it a commonality among people that the things that they grew up with, the music they listened to, the technology that they used, the cars that they drove, the way they did things were the correct things, and they view any change from that as heresy?
Well, yeah, and you mentioned comfort zones. One of the interesting things that's happened over the past 20 years is that fashion hasn't changed much. If you look at, and I'm referring to clothing, or even musical taste in some ways. If you look at, let's say, a period from, and I can't remember where I read this, but it was a fascinating article. If you look at a period from, let's say, the 1910s to the 1940s, right? The huge changes in how people dress, 1940s to 1970s. Major changes in the types of music that people listen to, the types of what people drove, what they look like, social mores. And uh, there's actually been not much changing in the past 30 years with regards to um, both men's and women's fashion in terms of what we wear. Even things like, I mean, it wasn't a full 30 years ago, but grunge and flannels, and on the whole, people wear jeans and people wear hoodies and people wear bomber jackets. Or the thought being, as far as why that is that there's so much other change in our culture that we only can handle so much change at any one time. And so, with the digital technology explosion that we've seen, that itself has changed our lives and our patterns so much that that type of change doesn't go into things like fashion or music as much as it has in years, in decades past. So, to your point about change and heresy, and isn't it true that what we are used to becomes the normal? I do think that there's a certain amount of change that we can handle. And once it starts to go beyond that, it gets uncomfortable for people and they quickly go back into some old routines.
And of course, what we do is we help people and help them understand established patterns of behavior, both thought patterns and physical actions and behaviors. And we help them step back and look at those behaviors rather than from them. And also, we help people develop what we call on this show power words, such as I am and I choose, which gives you an empowerment over yourself and your life, which unfortunately sometimes we give to others. And the beautiful
Yeah.
thing about this is we have a choice on how much to participate in any type of drama, any type of technology, or any type of situation.
It's a great way to look at it. And I would maybe even suggest the not necessarily the opposite, but on the one hand, using I statements generates power for oneself, but not using them removes, I view it less about giving yourself power than it is abdicating that power.
And we often talk about how the only power that people, places, things, situations, especially thoughts and feelings have is the power that we choose to give that person. We choose to give it. No one can make you happy, sad, angry, or glad. The only person who can do that is yourself. And when we help people understand that. So, as an adolescent psychiatrist, I have a hunch that you're approached more than once about my son and or daughter having their face stuck in a phone or on a video game.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with those situations? How do you talk to the parents?
Oh yeah, well it's I mean, one of the things that's interesting is I always have people coming and saying, uh, my kid can't pay attention, um, but he can pay attention to that screen for hours at a time, as if that's as if that's somehow surprising, right? As if like the glowing, flashing screen, like flickering at a whatever frame rate, like of course that's going to entrance your child's brain. Like of course they're going to stare at that thing. Like it's it's February in Pittsburgh. It's gray. It's slow. It's and then you've got the bright, shiny, flashy thing. It's like, well, of course they're gonna be. We're all pulled into that, right? You mentioned something about rhythms, and um, I'm curious for you, like, what do you use as anchors for that for people? How do you, what do you, as a therapist, what baseline are you using to compare them against?
Here's this one of the things that I use, Matt. I ask people to compare themselves to a flower in a garden, and I said, do flowers in a garden compare themselves to other flowers, or do they bloom? And then I ask them, what are the three elements that it takes to make a flower bloom, to have a plant be healthy? Well, it's water, sunlight, and soil. So then we transition into the holistic model where the water becomes taking care of your physical body. The sunlight, again, we go back to the 12-step world. We call that the sunlight of the spirit, a connection with some type of spirituality of your own choosing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talk about the soil as the environment that you place yourself in.
Mm-hmm.
If you take a healthy, beautiful plant and you transplant it into a sandbox, it's going to wither.
Mm-hmm.
And what people don't understand is, although at times they don't have a choice as to their environment or where they placed, they do have a choice as who do they surround themselves with? What do they wish to be? Where can they, what type of action steps can they take to transplant themselves into perhaps a more beneficial environment?
Okay.
And what we do is we help people use those choose type of words to get a baseline. Matt, what one of the questions I often ask people, I said, if everything was taken away from you, your health, your money, your home, everything, who'd be with you at the end? Who'd be standing with you? Who'd never desert you? And think
Mm-hmm.
about that carefully. And then I ask these people to name those people. And then I'll say, who in your life do you trust so much that if they said fall, I will catch you, you'd fall without hesitation?
Mm.
Those are the people, those are the relationships you want to add to and reinforce. That's what's
Mm-hmm.
important. The other stuff is trivial nonsense. And it's the sooner that you disconnect and declutter your mind and your life from that, then perhaps you can bloom a bit.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I'm curious about is what life was like X years ago. Right? Pick a time frame. Um, the I don't think we have a very good institution cultural memory of what things were like before, and there's this comparison we have of what you know how things used to be. Right? I'm reminded of this meme going around of like uh, it's a bunch of people on the bus in like the 30s and everyone's face is in a newspaper, right? And then they compare it with the image of the bus now and everyone's face is in a screen and saying like, oh, well, and the caption says something like, these kids today with their faces, stuck up in the screens. And it's, um, I don't think we really, as humans, are equipped to recall what life was like 10 years ago.
I get a lot of people who are disgruntled with the quote youth of today, and they tell me that they're so entitled and they're so disrespectful and they're so selfish. And I say, oh boy, that sounds familiar to me. And then I'll bring out a sheet of paper that I usually keep with me, and I'll read it. And it talks about how the youth of today are so entitled, so selfish and self-centered, so disrespectful, and on and on and on. And they say, yeah, that's right. And I said, you know who wrote that? And they say, no, but I'd like to meet them. I said, well, you'd have to have a time machine because Socrates wrote that about the youth of Athens.
We have no way
Yeah.
to transmit.
Yeah, we don't. I don't think
the
we have a great
feelings and
memory of.
attitudes. I mean, aside from writing, and books, but that doesn't fully capture it. And even ourselves, like we have this idea about what what screen time used to be like, or not be like, or have or not have. My kid, like I remember sitting and watching. There was the Jetsons, and then it was Flintstones, and then it was the Jetsons, and then after the Jetsons, sometimes it'd be Scooby Doo, and it was like, how, like I was allowed to just do that. I had good parents, great family, like, and we were like, it's just something that happened. Like you just got to watch TV. It was just part of the play. And you didn't get that much screen time every day that you watch like an hour and a half of TV, but it certainly was enough that I knew that those shows went back to back to back. And yet now, like, I'll get anxious if my kids watch like 2 22-minute shows back to back. So, and thinking that that's some golden time where I would play baseball in the yard with all the neighborhood kids, for hours on end, which didn't happen.
I was at a thrift shop a month or so ago with somebody. We were looking at all the different articles, and a fellow come in there and they had a bunch of kites, and we started talking, and he said, yeah. I said, are you interested in flying kites? He's there, yeah. He's there, I developed an app for my kids. It's called Play Outside. So, however, like the Buddha says, we want to walk that middle path. We want to find the moderation.
Yeah, and people forget that Buddha was a rich prince who had slept with 1,000 women, who had been an entrepreneur, right?
Yes.
Buddha was a rich prince who then went and founded his own business, did well. So he wasn't self-made because he's a rich prince, right? So, and then went to go study love, right? I.e., live in a brothel.
Well, he lived a life of complete entitlement, and he was a little bit unfamiliar with what occurred outside the palace walls.
Right. Right. So the right. So our expectations they're molded in back.
There's a key word right there, Matt. Expectations.
Yeah.
Please check out our website at fishingwithoutbait.com, where you can listen to the show, comment on our discussions, and find out where you can subscribe to our podcast. If you're interested in flying the colors of Fishing Without Bait, click the shop icon on our website. We have clothing, mugs, cell phone cases, and so much more. Show the world that you fish without bait. This show is a member of the Sorgatron Media Podcast Network. Find out more at sorgatronmedia.com.